Massive accident in Hamilton's pit lane during a practice session in Pirelli. Hamilton suffered a serious injury and required 22 stitches on his face. Stick around until the end to get all the details. This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The peaceful, almost sacred calm of the early hours at the Pirelli testing grounds in northern Italy was obliterated in an instant yesterday, transforming what should have been a meticulously orchestrated technical session into a cataclysmic disaster of staggering proportions. On a day designed for absolute control, both Mercedes and Ferrari found themselves swept into a maelstrom of chaos that no amount of preparation could have possibly anticipated, their precision reduced to rubble in the blink of an eye. From the moment the first engineers arrived at the facility, the atmosphere was electric with unspoken tension. Mercedes had brought an arsenal of experimental upgrades for the W15, codenamed Nightshade, featuring a revolutionary dynamic cooling matrix and adaptive aero fins designed to maximize tire longevity in Miami's brutal conditions. Every member of Hamilton's crew moved with the silent urgency of soldiers preparing for battle, eyes locked on the prize, words kept to an absolute minimum. Lewis himself was in a state of almost transcendent focus, carrying the weight of both history and expectation on his shoulders. Witnesses described him as eerily calm, methodical to the point of obsession. He performed a series of slow, deliberate breathing exercises beside his car before the first run, whispering to himself as if invoking some unseen force. His final words before climbing into the cockpit were overheard by one mechanic. "Today I remind them all who I am." Meanwhile, the Ferrari camp was a storm of suppressed fury. Charles Leclerc, stung by weeks of political turmoil within Maranello's inner circles, was desperate to reassert his dominance. His SF-24, equipped with a radical kinetic energy redistribution system known internally as Scarlet Nova, was tuned to perfection. Ferrari mechanics worked feverishly under the stern, hawk-eyed supervision of Frédéric Vasseur, who barked orders in rapid French, his usual calm replaced by an almost manic intensity. The disaster unfolded with merciless speed. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Hamilton's launch from the pit was, by every metric, flawless, his reaction time verging on superhuman, the W15 surging forward with such ferocious efficiency that engineers in the garage erupted into stunned applause, only to be silenced an instant later. Ferrari, aiming to mirror Mercedes' pit exit simulation with millisecond timing, triggered Leclerc's launch just a heartbeat too soon. The SF-24 shot out of its box like a missile, but the timing was catastrophically off. The collision, when it came, was not just a crash, it was an annihilation. The right rear of Hamilton's car and the front left of Leclerc's machine met in a violent splintering explosion of carbon, metal, and raw energy. Hamilton's W15 spun wildly, shedding bodywork like shrapnel. Leclerc's front suspension disintegrated, sending fragments hurtling into the pit barriers. The air filled with the horrific sound of tearing composite materials and the shrieks of tortured engines. Inside both garages, sheer pandemonium erupted. Radios screamed in overlapping chaos. Engineers sprinted toward the smoking wreckage, faces stricken with horror. Toto Wolff was seen tearing his headset apart with his bare hands, bellowing into a backup radio unit. "Lock down the telemetry. Cut every external feed. Not a single frame leaves this track, you understand me?" Frédéric Vasseur, pale and trembling with rage, slammed his clipboard onto the concrete floor so violently that it splintered into pieces. One Ferrari mechanic collapsed to his knees, hands over his head, muttering prayers in Italian. As emergency crews swarmed the scene, it became apparent that the incident was far more severe than first feared. Hamilton, though conscious, was covered in blood. Medical personnel rushed him to the circuit's infirmary, where it was revealed he had sustained deep lacerations to his face from fragments of shattered carbon fiber. In a horrifying detail that quickly leaked to the press, Lewis required 26 stitches across his cheek and brow to close the wounds. His helmet, sliced open on the left side, now sits impounded for FIA investigation, a grim testament to the force of the impact. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. In the makeshift medical bay, an astonishing confrontation took place. Despite his injuries, Hamilton, stitched and bandaged, stormed into the adjoining room where Leclerc was being evaluated. Security attempted to intervene, but Lewis brushed them aside, glaring at Charles with a fury that could have melted steel. "You should have waited. You should have F********* ing waited, Charles. Hamilton shouted, his voice raw and shaking with barely suppressed rage. Leclerc, equally incensed and refusing to back down, shot to his feet, nose inches from Hamilton's battered face, shouting back. Maybe if your team didn't think they owned the track, this wouldn't have happened. You think you're untouchable? Think again. Order was only restored when team officials physically separated the two drivers, dragging them away in opposite directions, both still hurling furious accusations. Outside, the situation deteriorated further. Rumors spread like wildfire across the paddock. Some whispered that a disgruntled Ferrari staffer had tampered with the pit release sequence. Others claimed Mercedes had deliberately orchestrated a high-risk launch to intimidate their Italian rivals. Wild speculation even suggested that Pirelli itself might be implicated, eager to generate drama and deflect attention from ongoing tire durability scandals. Within 2 hours, the FIA issued an emergency bulletin stating that the incident was under full formal investigation, and that both teams would be summoned to a closed hearing ahead of the Miami Grand Prix. Sources indicate that potential penalties could include massive fines, loss of testing privileges, and even race suspensions, an unprecedented move in the modern era. As night descended over the battered facility, the mood was apocalyptic. Mercedes engineers were seen packing up their equipment in grim silence, while Ferrari personnel engaged in heated arguments under the cold glare of floodlights. Social media exploded with fury and speculation. Fan theories multiplied by the second. Was Hamilton's injury worse than reported? Would Leclerc face suspension? Was this the opening salvo in a hidden war between two of the sport's greatest empires? Meanwhile, inside a private recovery room, Hamilton reportedly stared at his reflection, face stitched, bruised and battered, and muttered to a close aide, "They wanted to break me. All they did was light a fire they'll never be able to put out." And in a distant corner of the airport tarmac, preparing to board a hastily arranged private flight, Leclerc turned to a small group of confidants and said coldly, "In Miami, they'll understand. Nobody puts me second." Whatever peace once existed between Mercedes and Ferrari has been obliterated beyond recognition. The road to Miami is no longer paved with points and podiums. It is littered with blood, broken trust, and a thirst for vengeance so fierce it threatens to engulf the entire championship. The battle lines are drawn. The war has begun. The collision between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc wasn't merely a racing accident. It was a cataclysmic rupture, a thunderous break in the rhythm of the Grand Prix, a ferocious explosion of speed and fate that left everyone witnessing it stunned into silence. The two masterpieces of engineering collided at precisely the wrong instant, a savage 32-degree meeting that ripped apart any illusions of invulnerability. The sheer brutality of it defied reason. It wasn't a simple crash, it was an eruption, a catastrophic tearing of carbon fiber and machinery that sounded like a cannon blast rolling across the circuit. Pittsburgh Lane personnel instinctively recoiled, their faces registering shock, disbelief, and a dawning horror as the true scale of the calamity became clear. The impact was devastating and total. Hamilton's front left section slammed directly into the exposed rear right of Leclerc's Ferrari like a battering ram, the violence of the hit magnified by the impossible speeds involved. The carbon didn't merely crack, it detonated, disintegrating in a sharp-edged cloud of blackened debris that shot across the tarmac like razor-edged confetti. Sparks erupted in a furious spray, showering the scene in a molten storm of orange and white as tires squealed in agony and titanium skated brutally across the asphalt, screeching louder than a banshee at full cry. Inside the garages, all hell broke loose. Wrenches clattered to the ground. Telemetry screens glitched under the tremor of the crash. Radios exploded with overlapping shouts. Engineers sprinted toward the pit wall, faces pale, hearts hammering. In that frozen, awful moment, winning, losing, and strategy meant nothing. Only survival mattered. Hamilton's car didn't merely spin. It was wrenched into a savage counterclockwise vortex, thrown into a deadly pirouette, flinging shards of itself with every brutal rotation. When the Mercedes finally connected with the Tech Pro barriers, the resulting impact was apocalyptic. The gearbox shattered into 1,000 gleaming fragments. The rear wing folded grotesquely, mangled beyond recognition. Body panels exploded into the air like shrapnel from a detonated shell. The halo system stood defiant, the last unbroken remnant of what had once been a 300 km/h masterpiece. Leclerc's Ferrari, though slightly more intact, stumbled forward like a wounded animal before collapsing completely, its rear suspension shattered, dragging helplessly along the surface until it came to a halt. Leclerc remained eerily still in the cockpit, his gloved hands locked around the steering wheel, his chest heaving as he struggled to process the violent chaos he had just survived. His visor lifted slowly, revealing eyes wide with shock, his body trembling under the weight of adrenaline and fear. The race directors wasted no time. Red flags appeared instantly. Marshals charged toward the scene, extinguishers and stretchers in hand. In race control, frantic voices overlapped, desperate for clarity, demanding medical teams to report immediately. Up in the commentary boxes, words failed even the most seasoned broadcasters. "This is beyond anything," one whispered, voice quivering. From the remains of his car, Hamilton dragged himself out, a warrior battered but unbowed. His movements were jerky, pained, his left arm pressed tightly against his ribs. Blood was visible along the seams of his race suit where shards had sliced through. For a few agonizing seconds, he refused help, stubborn pride overriding pain, until finally his strength gave out and medics rushed to catch him as he slumped to his knees. On the stretcher, his face twisted with fury rather than fear. "Get me the onboard footage," he demanded through gritted teeth, the oxygen mask barely muffling his voice. "I need to see it. Right now." His anger wasn't random. It was laser-focused, aimed with deadly intent at whoever he believed had wronged him. In the Mercedes garage, shock quickly mutated into barely contained rage. Toto Wolff stood as if carved from stone, his face a mask of barely suppressed fury. Telemetry data scattered across shattered laptops. Engineers spoke in clipped, urgent tones. Bono, Hamilton's voice in the chaos of every race, sat staring at the crash replay, silent, jaw set so tight it looked painful. At Ferrari, the atmosphere was suffocating. Leclerc sat in stunned silence, shoulders slumped, his gloves still on, his helmet resting on the desk in front of him. "I moved late," he finally said, voice hoarse, almost inaudible. "I didn't think he was that close." His race engineer attempted to reassure him, but the words fell flat. Everyone knew the truth was more complicated, far darker than anyone wanted to admit aloud. Gossip spread like wildfire. Within minutes, theories exploded across the paddock. Some claimed Hamilton had been reckless, seeing a gap that was never truly there. Others argued Leclerc had made a desperate defensive move at the worst possible instant. No two people told the same version of the story. Every conversation buzzed with half-truths and frantic speculation. The FIA stewards convened an emergency session, reviewing footage, telemetry, steering angles, brake pressures. Nothing was simple. Social media detonated almost immediately. Hashtag prayers for Lewis, hashtag support for Charles, hashtag who is at fault, all three trending worldwide. Fans picked sides with ferocity. Memes appeared within minutes. Edits of the crash circulated endlessly, some slowed down to impossibly dramatic music, some breaking down every frame like forensic evidence in a murder trial. In the FIA medical facility, Hamilton lay still, his breathing shallow, his mind racing even as his body demanded stillness. Team doctors hovered nearby, whispering about possible rib fractures, spinal stress, and the looming question of Miami. His physio wiped the sweat from his forehead and urged him to rest, but Lewis only stared at the ceiling, replaying the crash in his mind again and again, every detail etched into his memory with painful clarity. "I'm racing," he muttered to nobody in particular. "Even if I have to crawl to that car." Behind closed doors, Mercedes team meetings turned heated. Reserve drivers were contacted discreetly. Mick Schumacher's name was floated openly. Stoffel Van Dorn's suitcase was reportedly rushed onto a private jet. Journalists pieced together fragments, desperate to be the first to break the story. Toto Wolff faced the cameras late into the night. His words were measured, but the anger simmered just below the surface. "Lewis Hamilton is the toughest man I've ever met," he said grimly. "And if he tells me he can race in Miami, then you'd better believe he'll be there. Standing, fighting, and reminding everyone exactly who he is." Meanwhile, Ferrari's press conference was equally fraught. Fred Vasseur chose his words carefully, but the undercurrent of blame was unmistakable. "Mistakes were made," he said. "We will analyze everything. We will learn from this." Elsewhere, Verstappen smirked when asked about the crash. "Two lions fighting in a cage too small," he said, shrugging. "It was only a matter of time." Alonso, with a glint in his eye, said simply, "They forgot." In the jungle, survival belongs to the one who bites first. As the paddock emptied into the night, tension hung in the air like a storm that refused to break. Everyone could feel it. Something had changed. Rivalries had turned radioactive. Alliances had cracked. Every handshake felt colder, every glance sharper. The championship was no longer a game, it had become a war. And somewhere, Lewis Hamilton lay awake in the dark, his body aching, his pride bruised, his fury undimmed. The world thought they had seen him at his fiercest before. They hadn't. Not yet. Not even close. Miami was no longer just another race. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The atmosphere in the paddock froze into a strange, almost ghostly stillness the moment the collision happened. It wasn't just the screech of shattered carbon or the harsh squeal of tires that left everyone paralyzed. It was the abrupt, jarring silence that followed, the kind that made the world itself seem to hold its breath. The air became heavy, charged with invisible energy, as Marshall sprinted toward the wreckage. Cameras zoomed in with almost predatory hunger, broadcasting live to millions the sight of Charles Leclerc stepping out of the damaged Ferrari, his body tense, his fingers clenched into rigid fists. His helmet stayed on, concealing the maelstrom raging beneath, but every sharp, deliberate movement betrayed a mind boiling over with anger, disbelief, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Leclerc stalked toward the Ferrari garage like a man possessed, his steps mechanical, his body stiff with fury he barely managed to contain. Mechanics scattered from his path, avoiding eye contact, pretending to busy themselves with irrelevant tasks, anything to dodge the inevitable eruption. The moment the garage doors closed behind him, the storm broke loose. According to sources close to the team, Leclerc ripped off his gloves and hurled them violently at the debrief table, sending coffee cups and tablets tumbling to the floor. "You gave me the all clear," he roared, his voice rough and cutting through the thick air. "You told me it was safe. You told me go. Were you blind? Were you deaf?" His race engineer tried to speak, to explain, but Leclerc's glare cut him down before he could finish a single sentence. Elsewhere inside the Ferrari structure, a heated argument was erupting between the strategy chief and the team principal, their voices barely contained as furious accusations were exchanged. Snippets caught through thin walls revealed sharp words like, "total incompetence," and "this isn't amateur hour, it's Formula One." Panic radiated off the junior engineers who sat glued to telemetry screens, frantically reviewing pit release data with sweaty palms and wide, terrified eyes. Ferrari's official press release, issued hours later, was sterile, bloodless, and utterly infuriating to fans. The statement blamed a pit release synchronization failure, without daring to assign responsibility to any one person. It was a bland, politically cautious phrase that reeked of cowardice. Fans exploded with rage online. Within an hour, #Hamilton Incident and #Ferrari Fail were the top two trends worldwide. Every inch of footage was dissected, slowed down, enhanced, compared, and argued over. People posted endless screenshots showing the absurdly tight margins between Hamilton's rear wing and Leclerc's nose cone, furious captions demanding justice and accountability. One viral thread insisted that hidden signals were being used between garages to manipulate pit timings. Another popular theory claimed Ferrari's pit lane AI system had glitched under pressure, causing the catastrophic error. TikTok flooded with montages of the incident set to ominous music, portraying it as either a tragic accident or a masterstroke of mind games, depending on whose team you supported. While the internet caught fire, Toto Wolff was moving through the paddock with chilling purpose. He wasn't shouting, but his restrained fury was more frightening than any explosion. He stormed into the FIA's temporary race control trailer without so much as knocking, and though the walls muffled most of his words, witnesses outside still caught the furious tone. "This was reckless endangerment, not racing," he fumed. "You gamble with championships, not with lives." Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton sat motionless in the darkened Mercedes data center, still in full gear, helmet on, utterly still, as if hoping if he sat there long enough, reality might reverse itself. An engineer approached with a printout, but Hamilton didn't even glance at it. Eventually, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "The moment I saw red in the mirror, I knew it was too late. They chose to roll the dice. They chose for me." Technical reports began leaking soon after. Mercedes' experimental rear diffuser, tested for the first time that weekend, was designed to deliver unprecedented low-speed grip. But it had one critical flaw: it required precise throttle management. The slightest external disruption could destabilize the delicate balance, triggering unpredictable behavior. One engineer privately described it as walking a tightrope above a pit of spikes, with someone shaking the rope every few seconds. The driver's briefing that evening was a battleground in all but name. George Russell slammed his pen onto the table and muttered to Lando Norris, "Pit exits aren't supposed to be death traps." Norris, unusually serious, nodded. Fernando Alonso leaned back with a weary smirk. "This isn't about rules," he said darkly. "It's about who dares to push the chaos farther." Oscar Piastri, still adjusting to the ruthless politics of Formula One, whispered to Yuki Tsunoda, "They'll call it a racing incident, sweep it under the rug, and pretend none of this happened." Tsunoda only shrugged. If you scream loud enough, they hear what they want to hear. In the Red Bull hospitality suite, Christian Horner was in fine form, giving sly theatrical interviews to whoever stuck a microphone under his nose. "It's very simple," he said, voice oozing mock innocence. "When you dance on the edge of catastrophe, eventually you slip. Some faster than others." Later that night, the FIA issued a chilling statement. A full inquiry had been opened, one that would dig deep into not just this incident, but the entire season's pit lane operations. Data streams, radio transcripts, internal messages, all would be examined under a microscope. It was a declaration of war without firing a shot. Behind closed doors, the tension mounted. Mercedes, demanding independent telemetry audits. Ferrari, frantically lawyering up. Red Bull, circling like sharks, already plotting how to weaponize the scandal. And somewhere in the shadows, rumors swirled that certain teams had already been warned months ago about questionable pit exit simulations, but had ignored the warnings in pursuit of any possible advantage. In the fans' world, chaos reigned. TikTokers created deep-dive videos exposing alleged patterns of favoritism. Twitter threads compared the incident to past scandals like Crashgate and Spygate. Reddit forums buzzed with claims that mechanics from rival teams had leaked insider secrets about deliberate interference strategies. YouTube exploded with dramatic reenactments, complete with ominous background scores and voiceovers warning that the soul of Formula One was now under threat. It wasn't just a crash. It was a rupture. A crack spreading through the foundation of the sport itself. Suspicion saturated the air. Trust among teams shattered like the wreckage on the pit straight. Alliances built over years were crumbling in real time. Every driver now looked at every other driver differently. Every engineer questioned every release, every strategy, every piece of telemetry. No one was safe. Everyone was guilty until proven innocent. By the time the pale morning light spilled over the shattered paddock, there was no illusion of unity left. Formula One had crossed a threshold. An invisible line had been crossed, and everyone knew there was no going back. Not this time. The moments that followed the incident were drenched in a heavy, almost tangible tension. The pit lane, typically alive with a chaotic rhythm of preparation and the ceaseless hum of activity, was suddenly drowned in an eerie, unnatural stillness. It was the kind of profound silence that seemed to warp the very fabric of time, stretching every second into an eternity. The wrecked Mercedes was loaded onto the emergency carrier under a cloud of disbelief, its mangled form a heartbreaking contrast to the precision masterpiece it had been just hours earlier. Around it, the Mercedes crew stood motionless, as if the ground itself had swallowed their resolve. This wasn't simply a broken car, it was a shattered heartbeat, a sudden devastating crack in the armor of a team clawing its way back to the summit. Inside the team headquarters, Toto Wolff looked like a man possessed, his face tight with fury masked under a thin veneer of professionalism. His hand, white-knuckled around his mobile phone, trembled slightly as he barked terse commands. "I want facts, not theories. I want the whole telemetry breakdown, not guesses. No assumptions. No margin for error." With a vicious slam of his hand against the briefing table, the gravity of the situation echoed off every steel beam and carbon fiber panel. James Allison, standing nearby, snapped into action, issuing clipped, rapid-fire orders to squads of engineers now scrambling like firefighters at the scene of a five-alarm inferno. But while the Mercedes team rallied around the mechanical remains, the real crisis, the one that could shatter an entire championship, was unfolding far from the prying eyes of the paddock. Lewis Hamilton, the warrior whose very name had become synonymous with excellence, was no longer at the venue. Whisked away under an intense security escort, he was transported to an undisclosed medical facility, shielded from journalists and rival teams alike. Angela Cullen, his trusted right hand, was by his side, her comforting demeanor now strained, every step she took mirroring the weight of the moment. Within the sterile walls of that hidden hospital, the prognosis was bleak. Deep muscular trauma, a suspected fractured rib, spinal inflammation. Injuries that, by any reasonable medical standard, demanded weeks, if not months, of rehabilitation. The chief specialist, a stern-faced veteran of battlefield medicine, bent over Hamilton's bed and spoke softly but firmly. "Lewis, getting back into a Formula One car could cause irreversible harm. It's not just your season on the line, it's your life." Hamilton, pale but burning with a relentless intensity, gave a slight nod, his voice barely a whisper yet charged with electricity. "If this is the end, then I end it on my terms. On that track. Not here." Angela tried desperately to intervene, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "You've already carved your name into history. You owe no one anything. You've proven everything. You have nothing left to fight for." Hamilton, summoning strength from somewhere deep within, fixed his gaze on her, unwavering. "I fight because I must. It's not about legacy. It's about soul. About refusing to let them write my ending for me." While this battle of wills raged in private, the Paddock and the wider motorsport world descended into absolute pandemonium. Red Bull, ever opportunistic, began revising their race scenarios, adjusting assumptions to account for a weakened Mercedes presence. Behind closed doors, Christian Horner addressed his inner circle with calculated urgency. "They'll throw everything they have left at this. Expect the unexpected. If Hamilton shows up, he'll be dangerous. If he doesn't, we step on their throats." Max Verstappen, unfazed, merely arched an eyebrow and said with a smirk, "Whether he's there or not, it's still my race to win." Legends fall, too. Happens to everyone eventually. At Ferrari, the atmosphere was equally charged. Charles Leclerc, abandoning his usual polished restraint, reportedly confided in Carlos Sainz, "If there's even the slightest weakness in Mercedes, we have to strike. No mercy. We have to take everything we can, while we can." Social media went into absolute meltdown. Photoshopped images of Hamilton in hospital beds flooded every platform. Some showed him grimacing in pain, others depicted him defiantly suited up and ready to battle. None were confirmed. All were devoured by a public ravenous for drama, desperate for a scrap of truth in a sea of rumor and exaggeration. Back in London, in a dimly lit rehab center surrounded by specialists and loyal staff, Hamilton faced his moment of reckoning. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he managed to stand, each muscle protesting, each breath a war in itself. The doctors urged caution. Angela begged him to reconsider. Yet Hamilton, with the grim determination that had defined his entire life, forced himself upright and said only, "Tell them I'm coming." Mercedes sprang into frenzied action. The backup chassis was rapidly prepped, worked on with the kind of feverish energy normally reserved for championship finales. Spare parts were rushed in by private courier. Software was reloaded and tested 3 times over. Every precaution was taken because they knew, if Hamilton was going to risk everything, they would risk nothing less than perfection to support him. Before sunrise, under the shroud of darkness, a private Gulfstream jet rocketed toward Miami. On board, Lewis Hamilton sat in isolation, pain gnawing at him with every heartbeat, but his spirit unbreakable. As dawn crept over Miami's skyline, the circuit was electric with anticipation. Journalists prowled like wolves. Spectators pressed against fences. Even rival drivers paused their routines, straining for any glimpse of the impossible. And then it happened. Out of a matte black Mercedes SUV stepped Hamilton. No team gear. No helmet. Clad in an immaculate white linen suit, walking with the deliberate, unstoppable force of a hurricane made flesh. A silence fell, a deep reverent hush, before the stands erupted into cheers so loud it rattled the metal frameworks of the grandstands. Every eye locked onto him. Rival crews peered from behind pit walls. Cameras snapped furiously. Even the hardened mechanics of Red Bull and Ferrari found themselves stealing glances. Hamilton didn't acknowledge the noise. He didn't wave. He simply walked, one step at a time, toward the garage where his rebuilt machine waited. Mechanics cleared a path instinctively, not because they had to, but because something in the air demanded it. Inside the Mercedes garage, the atmosphere was almost religious. The team, many with tears in their eyes, simply watched as their champion approached. Without a word, he suited up, every movement slow, precise, heavy with meaning. As he lowered himself into the cockpit, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, the roar of the engine shattered the stillness. Raw. Fierce. Alive. The signal was clear. Lewis Hamilton wasn't just returning to race. He was returning to conquer. He was the storm reborn, the myth made flesh, the defiant heartbeat of a sport that sometimes forgets what true greatness looks like until it's staring it in the face, daring it to look away. The lights blinked down toward green. And history, trembling, waited to be rewritten once more.